Hi everyone, it's Alex, and today I really just wanted to give a short video about me still thinking about in my wrap-up for September how I talked about Teaching a Stone to Talk by Annie Dillard, and I specifically talked about an essay in there called A Field of Silence, where Annie Dillard particularly was struck by the idea of silence that felt inflicted upon her. And after reading that essay, it made me really consider sort of with fiction in general how the theme of silence is really maybe unconsciously just something I really look for or pay attention to, and how I think it's so reflective of my thoughts with reading as an activity or even a hobby too. The first book I wanted to talk about is actually a very recent read and mentions silence a good amount of times, and that is Villette by Charlotte Bronte. Some rousing choruses struck me as the best part of the evening's entertainment. Through the whole performance, timid instrumental duets, conceited vocal solos, sonorous, brass-lunged choruses, my attention gave but one eye and one ear to the stage, the other being permanently retained in the service of Dr. Bretton. I could not forget him, nor cease to question how he was feeling, what he was thinking, whether he was amused or on the contrary. At last he spoke. "And how do you like it all, Lucy? You are very quiet," he said in his own cheerful tone. "I am quiet," I said, "because I am so very, very much interested, not merely with the music, but with everything about me." The intimacy towards silence that our protagonist Lucy feels, I think, is both a comfort and discomfort, knowing that she can sort of use silence as her own form of escapism. And considering escapism, it made me, or at least reminded me, of the act of reading, especially any time I've ever read in public, where I feel like, given the positive connotations of reading, I'm often allowed to be left alone to read and be with my own thoughts. And it also made me think how I don't prefer audiobooks because in a silly way, I feel like audiobooks are a sense of intrusion upon my own feelings or what I'm supposed to feel. But even given this perception of being a reader or even a quote-unquote good or better reader depending what I'm reading, there's always never that true formal connection or verbal correspondence. Everything allows me to indulge in my own silence through reading. So my version of Lucy's concert, I would say, is me actively reading, and even if I have outlets like BookTube where I can talk about my thoughts, it's always met with a sense of preparation and a sense of presentation anyway. Because this quote from Villette made me think about this exchange of silence or perception of it, where I feel like Villette sort of gauged how I feel about my own sense of silence in literature, I wanted to find another quote that I felt like did a good job about the reverse, or at least someone engaging and watching my own silence occurring. And I think a good example of this would be from the book Housekeeping by Marilynne Robinson, and there's a quote here I really like that says, "Sylvie did not want to lose me. She did not want me to grow gigantic and multiple so that I seemed to fill the whole house, and she did not wish me to turn subtle and miscible, so that I could pass through the membranes that separate dream and dream. She did not wish to remember me. She much preferred my simple, ordinary presence, silent and ungainly though I might be, for she could regard me without strong emotion, a familiar shape, a familiar face, a familiar silence. She could forget I was in the room. She could speak to herself or to someone in her thoughts, with pleasure and animation, even while I sat beside her. This was the measure of our intimacy, that she gave almost no thought to me at all. But if she lost me, I would become extraordinary by my vanishing." So while I mentioned that reading I feel like pretty much has a consensus of being very positive, I do think it does sort of foster these potential negative qualities upon people seeing reading, or at least reading a lot from our sphere of BookTube, that it can be possibly negative depending how much you read or how often, and whether or not that's keeping you from considering the emotions that, like, what Ruth is feeling from Sylvie, even though from Sylvie's perspective, she may not even be realizing how Ruth feels. And speaking for myself, again, I think platforms like BookTube are great, although I do feel like it's sort of this intentional mental output that I produce in the world here, even though I know it actively doesn't influence my daily life, where often, sometimes I've realized I can go days without realizing I've said anything. There's definitely been passages of time where I've been so unaware of how often I think and feel without expressing it, and this quote definitely reminded me to sort of be more conscious about all of that. And by being conscious, that wouldn't even really mean necessarily talking more, but just really sort of understanding that I think how reading has helped me with things like my emotional intelligence or my ability to empathize with others and just be a well-rounded citizen in life, I think is something I can really feel happy about in years to come, about reading so much in my 20s and how it's really helped me. And there's one more quote I wanted to share that I think is probably most akin to how Annie Dillard felt in that essay from Teaching a Stone to Talk, emphasizing that sort of provocation or that surrender or that feeling of being overwhelmed by silence in general. And this quote actually comes from The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt. It's a big shift, I don't know quite how to explain it, between wanting and not wanting, caring and not caring. Of course it's a lot more than that too. Things are stronger and brighter and I feel on the edge of something inexpressible. I watch the clouds reflected on sliding panes and marvel how even my sadness can make me happy, and how all of it somehow can seem so necessary and right. I'd just as soon forget, but I can't. It's kind of the hum of a tuning fork. It's just there. It's here with me all the time. White noise and personal roar. And I keep thinking too of the more conventional wisdom, namely that the pursuit of pure beauty is a trap, a fast track to bitterness and sorrow, that beauty has to be wedded to something more meaningful. Our main character from The Goldfinch, Theo, actually has all of these thoughts towards the end of the book, which I think does a really good job at illuminating this facet of silence that becomes all-knowing and impenetrable. Although I think how we choose to approach our own confrontation with the sort of overwhelmingness that Theo feels is sort of in its own sense a sense of solace that I think with silence not many people get to encounter in life, or especially even try to make peace with. I promise I'm not leading all of this up to talk about like the existential void that we're all sucked into, but I do think reading overall does help people ask these questions about thinking about the bigger picture, about our position in the world, and how we add meaning to life, even if we think that's even required. Between these three books, I know that silence doesn't have to be as melodramatic as I'm making it out to be with my selections in this video, but I do like that with each of these characters that I mentioned, I like that silence always seems to be something that catches them by surprise. So those are what I'm sure some growing thoughts on silence that I'll have for years to come. But please let me know if in particular you maybe have a favorite passage about silence in literature. I would love to know. And while filming this, it occurred to me, or I remembered that Ashley at Climb the Stacks, I know somewhere she has an old video about also talking about silence as a part of literature or something like that. So I remember really liking it. I haven't watched it in a good while, but I'll find it and link it down below. So be sure to check that out. As always, thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.